There's been a crash.
Today we're going to tell you the storyline of a movie called Luther, The Fallen Son, from the year 2023. Telling us the story of a disgraced detective named John Luther, who had decided to break out from prison, and being a fugitive, to capture a sadistic serial killer who terrorizes London. And without further ado, let's get watching. But before we start, please support our channel by subscribing, and click the bell icon for future notifications. Now, let's start. The movie starts when a guy named Callum was receiving a call from an unknown person, who asked him to meet immediately, and threatened to send Callum disgrace video to his mom, if he didn't come. In the middle of his drive, Callum was startled by a sight of a car with an unconscious girl inside, and a man lying beside the car. While slowly approaching the car, Callum then decided to call the police to tell them about the condition. But then suddenly, the next morning, a group of police officers were seen conducting an investigation on the scene, where a detective named John Luther was there too. There the officers only found one female body, while it seems like Callum was kidnapped by the criminal the night before. Not long after, John was approached by Callum's mother, and asked him about Callum's whereabouts. But then John told her that the officers and him would do their best to find Callum. But then Callum's mom begged John to promise her to find her son and the criminal. Under her pressure, John finally promised her to be able to find them. Let alone because the same cases have been happening in London for the past 11 years. The next day there was a man named Robey, who ordered someone to look and to expose John's mistake. And for whatever reason, it turns out that Robey wanted to throw John into prison no matter how. Why? We'll know later, let's keep watching. Few days later, Robey's goal was finally achieved, where John was thrown into prison for violence and vigilante case, and for oftenly intimidating the defendants he had captured. Scene then shifted to John, who was being escorted to his cell. All the prisoners were shouting and scorned him, considering that John was a respected detective, including the prisoners John had captured, who held huge grudges towards him. After several days in prison, John was still bullied by the prisoners. He was even beaten by them when he was taking a bath. On the other side, Callum's mom received a call from an unknown person, who told her about Callum's location. And of course, she went to the exact location without any second thought. Arriving there, it turns out that she was not alone, because there was also another abductee's family who also received the same call from a mysterious person. And when they entered the building, they were shocked, seeing their long-lost children were hung, already dead. And shortly after, fire sparks suddenly appeared, and burned the place down, causing Callum's mom and the others to leave, leaving their family's body inside. The next day, the police force went to the scene with Odette Rain, the chief detective. Inside, Rain and her deputy named Archie were confused about the motives of the incident. And after doing the crime scene processing, Rain then gathered her subordinates for a meeting. There Rain tells them that one of the victims was an abductee from 11 years ago, which means that the perpetrator had planned the act from the first time. Meanwhile, on the other side, John, who was pensive, was suddenly given a letter from under his cell's door. It has a number of 65,8 written on it, which made him immediately realize that it was a number for a radio channel. John then immediately grabbed his radio and tuned it to the exact channel, and soon enough, he heard the voice of Callum when he was murdered, and then there was also a voice of the murderer saying that he was the one who had thrown John into the prison. Which means that the Robey guy we saw in the beginning of the movie is the one who did the serial murder. On the other side, Robey was seen visiting his wife, who turns out to be a fire victim from an incident 11 years ago. Sounds like a crime motive to me. Let's watch to see the truth. Soon after, Robey showed his wife a video of him when he murdered his victims. But then she looks uncomfortable with the sight. The next day, John had a visit from a woman who was none other than Callum's mom, who was there to ask John for his promise to capture the perpetrator. She then also told John how Callum was murdered. Hearing that, John felt guilty and was determined to capture the murderer no matter how. After the visit, Callum's mom went back to her car, with Robey in the driving seat. There she thanked Robey for bringing her there, despite them just knowing each other. On the other hand, in his cell, John was busy looking for a phone he had smuggled before, to call his friend for help. There John asked his friend to free him when he was transferred to another prison. He refused at first, but then after John begged him to, he finally agreed to John's request. At night, John made a scene in the prison by hitting another prisoner, and made the whole prison turn into chaos. There John also tried to fight the wardens, but then he was captured and they decided to send him to a more secure prison. In the middle of their way, the prison van was stopped by unknown people, which then made John to be captured and taken to the unknown's van. Yup, they're John's friends. The next day, John started his investigation by tracking the radio channel he found before. On the other side, there was Rain, who met an elderly man named Martin, who was John's former leader. There Rain asked Martin to join her to capture John, because she didn't want John to disturb the serial murder case investigation. Back to John, who had just arrived at the radio office. There John saw a guy that looked like the radio announcer, because he ran away as soon as he saw John's face. Fortunately, John managed to corner the guy and interrogated him. Trembling, the guy then told John that the voice John heard wasn't a live broadcast, but was played from a flash drive, which was sent by an unknown person. John then asked the announcer why he followed the orders of the unknown person. The announcer then told John that he met the unknown person on the internet, where they got closer and made the announcer open up and told the person about his dark secret, which was recorded by the person without him knowing, and was used by the person to threaten the announcer if he didn't do what the person told him to. It turns out that the announcer didn't know who the person exactly was, but fortunately he did save the person's number in his phone. John then immediately took the phone and headed off. Outside, John called his former leader, Martin. There he knew already that Martin had joined forces with the police to capture him. But then he still asked Martin to help track the perpetrator's number. Soon after, Martin had a discussion with Rain and Archie, where he suggested they give John the perpetrator's number location, so that they could capture them both at the same time when they met. At night, with the location in his hand, John then immediately looked for the person. There John tried to call the number with the announcer's phone, which made John finally able to spot Robey. But then Robey hostages someone there, and makes John step back. Meanwhile, Rain and her subordinates were seen running to capture John and Robey. But then suddenly some people jumped off the buildings around them, causing chaos.
On the ground!
Seeing John off guard, Robey then decided to run away. John then chased him into a tunnel, where John finally managed to stop Robey and led them into a fight. There Robey manages to cut John's stomach, but John persists to fight, and manages to down Robey. At the same time, there were the police officers who came to capture them, but then John and Robey decided to run away. After he successfully escaped, Robey then immediately called his inside man from the police, who was none other than Archie. There Robey ordered Archie to get rid of John, and if not, he threatened Archie to spread his disgraceful video to his family. It turns out that these people Robey had used were the people who had shared their stories to him, and he used it to control them. Soon after, John called Martin and told him to put his phone on speaker. There he told them that those victims might just met the perpetrator from the internet, and the perpetrator acted as the victim's sharing friend and used their disgraceful stories to manipulate them. John assumed that their fear of being humiliated were far more than their fear of death, just like the people who jumped off the buildings earlier that day.
John.
Scene then shifted to a young girl named Anya when she was by herself in her house. Not long after, she heard someone call her name, and it turns out it was Robey, who was there to kidnap her. On the other hand, at the police office, from the victims' phones, Martin finally discovered the fact about what John said. It was right that the victims only met their murderer from the internet. The perpetrator introduced himself with different names, but he gave them the same details about himself, that his wife was a victim of a fire incident in a place called Eccleston Square, 11 years ago. Rain immediately checked on the files and found that the perpetrator is a guy named Robey. At the same time, Rain suddenly received a call from Robey himself, and sent her a video of Anya, who turns out to be Rain's daughter. There Robey threatened to kill Anya if Rain didn't bring John to him within 24 hours. Rain then immediately called John and told him that she wouldn't capture him, There she told him that they have to work together to capture Robey. Long story short, Rain and John finally met, and Rain explained that the perpetrator is a guy named Robey, and that he has a wife who was a fire victim 11 years ago. John still has suspicions towards Rain, and asks her if there's any way for Robey to manipulate her, and then Rain says that he got her daughter hostage, and doesn't want him to do anything to her. John tried to convince her that it would have been a waste, since he was sure that Robey would still kill her daughter, even after she did everything he told her to. And the right thing to do is to capture Robey before he killed Anya. Rain's eyes finally opened and decided to go to Robey's wife's place immediately. There they begged Robey's wife to tell them Robey's whereabouts, and his motives. There she told them that back then, Robey was addicted to the internet, to the point that he neglected her. She was fed up, and asked for a divorce. But because of that, he went mad and dared to burn her alive. And he turned into a psychopath ever since. Even worse when she told them that Robey had kidnapped dozens of people in that month for him to make videos with. She also finally told them that Robey was currently on his way to Norway. Rain then immediately went home to prepare herself. Meanwhile, John called Martin again to ask him for help. Archie, who finds out Rain's plan, immediately reports to Robey. Robey was so sure that his wife was the one who spilled his location. Robey then ordered Archie to kill his wife, and promised that he wouldn't disturb him anymore. Long story short, when Archie just arrived at Robey's wife's place, he was shocked that there were Martin and 2 officers waiting for him. And it turns out that Martin already knew that Archie was working with Robey. And John's call before was to ask him to guard Robey's wife. Archie, who was afraid of Robey's threat, then decided to kill himself. Scene then shifted to John and Rain when they were on the way to the place Robey's wife had told them. On their walk, John accidentally saw an awful sight of dead bodies frozen underneath him in the ice. Inside the mansion, Rain suddenly screams seeing the hung body of her daughter with the other victims. Meanwhile, John decided to look for Robey. Rain suddenly found out that the body wasn't her daughter's. But then suddenly, she was attacked by Robey's man. While on the other side, John was also finally disabled by Robey, after he attacked him from behind. Soon after they were gathered, for Robey's live show on his dark web, the way he gained his money from his audience. Robey told Rain to do things, of course with her daughter's life on the line.
You to stand here. And it came to John's turn, to harm Rain, but with all their lives on the line if he didn't obey. When John was about to do it, he then realized that it would only make Robey go wilder. John then told the audience that the police force will track their IP and capture them ASAP. Hearing the threat, the audience were shocked and immediately went off the stream one by one. John then tried to intimidate Robey, and played with his psyche. Because he learned from Robey's wife, that Robey was a coward with an anxiety disorder. John's words finally shook his soul, and made him go away. John managed to free Rain and chased Robey right after. He saw a lot of Robey's hostages. When Robey was about to enter his car, John suddenly went in as well, where he tried to stop him. While on the other side, Rain and her daughter were still struggling with Robey's men. Back to John and Robey, who were still in a fight, until their car fell into the ice. John gave his all to fight Robey. At the same time, Martin and the police forces had just arrived and finally managed to rescue John. Meanwhile, Robey was already dead, and frozen underneath the ice. Meanwhile, Rain and Anya successfully defeated Robey's men. Rain thanked John, but sadly it didn't change the fact that John was still a fugitive, and was about to be sent back to the prison. Long story short, before he went back to the prison, John received treatments for his wounds. And not long after, he was visited by Martin, telling him that he will not go back to the prison, because there was a group who wanted John to do a mission for them.
But I don't think you're going back to prison.
And when John was about to meet the group's leader, suddenly,
You did a commendable job. So now what?
the movie ends. Looks like this is another movie we need to wait for its sequel. Are you excited? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to slam on the like button. Subscribe, and ring the bell icon for future recaps notifications. And if you have any movie you want us to recap, Please, do tell us in the comment section as well. And until next time.